the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering and cheering.
What's up, Mets fans? Welcome back to another Mets Hot Stove Live, and Happy New Year to all the Mets fans out there. We got Chris here from CP New York Sports. How is everybody doing today? We are going to go right into the new year talking about, well, the cold stove, as Chris and Nelson like to put it on their interstate report for sure. So, Chris, how are you doing? Happy New Year, buddy.
Happy New Year to you, Rob. Happy New Year to everyone in the chat here. Appreciate you all tuning in. It's a great year to have a great year, right? We'll try to debunk everything about this New York Mets team as we move along and roll along. Obviously, last couple of days, been taking some time to myself and sort of enjoying the holidays and especially getting ready for the new year. Just hit over 350 subs on the YouTube channel, so I thoroughly appreciate that. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do so on the channel as well. But it's been great. Not much Mets news as far as, you know, what I've been looking out for. I'm sure it's a little bit slow, especially with the holidays and the New Year's kind of coming around. But we're here to talk about this team and where they're heading toward in 2024 and beyond. So getting ready for that. Let's do it.
Absolutely. So again, new year, hopefully a new expectation for the Mets, whatever that might be. Your opinion, my opinion, everybody's in the chat's opinion when it comes to the Mets is, you know, it's all over the place right now because we don't know what is really set in stone with this team and the expectations for this team. It's hard to judge a team when a roster is not set yet. Almost all the free agents are basically still out there, except for a couple. You know, obviously the Yamamoto, Ohtani were the big ones, but other than that, you know, with Rodriguez, Giolito, and Nola early on in the offseason, there hasn't really been much movement at all. And I'm assuming very soon it's going to start picking up because Imanaga, and we'll get to him in a little bit. Before we'll talk about Carlos Mendoza's expectations, but Imanaga, his posting date. His last day to sign with the team is January 11th. It's only 10 days away. So it's going to happen rather quickly. I don't think he's going back to Japan, so he has to make a decision. So I think it's going to pick up when it comes to the starting pitching market. But first, let's talk about Carlos Mendoza and his expectations. Last time I had Hayden on Hot Stove, I asked about his expectations, and we kind of agreed on the two things that I wanted to see from a manager, and that was basically bullpen management and when's the right time to take out a starter. I think that's the two things managers still have a little bit of control over in Major League Baseball nowadays. So I'm going to ask you, Chris, what are the expectations, even though the roster is not set yet for the Mets? What type of expectations do you have with Carlos Mendoza? What do you want to see? And what do you think you will see from Mendoza?
Yeah, I have to agree with you and Hayden as well. I didn't hear you all say that. I kind of just tuned into that stream, was bouncing around doing a bunch of different stuff. But you guys absolutely hit the nail on the head there. It is about bullpen management, especially in a bullpen that seems to be a little bit of a, I wouldn't say a crapshoot, but we know what we've been doing in the bullpen so far this offseason. We haven't made the biggest, free agent signings in the bullpen sort of category. That's where I think that a lot of people have to have patience with Carlos Mendoza. Like, this is a very tough year to be a first-time manager in your career, right? If you're going to war this season with this type of roster moving forward. Now, like I said, there's plenty of moves to be had and made, both in the free agent market and the trade market, but we have to really set our expectations. I don't want to say low when it comes to Carlos Mendoza. We obviously want to see his thought processes and the way he goes about things go, turn out in the right direction. But in terms of the overall win-loss category, we can't knock him there if things go south, right? But what I want to see, in addition to that bullpen management, just the overall game management, is how he gets this New York Mets team to rally around him, right? I don't think that Luis Rojas was able to do that quite effectively as we all had hoped. And that's not a knock on Luis Rojas at all. It's just very hard to do that in your first year as manager. So I really hope that with his connections to the city of New York, with his connections to certain players, especially like a Luis Severino, who played directly under him as well over there with the Yankees. I want to see the camaraderie of this team because I really do think that that's an aspect in 2023 that this team was lacking.
Yep.
Very much so. And even Tommy Pham in his comments when he got traded to Arizona kind of alluded to that fact too. He didn't so much call out, any named players. He basically said who was on the crap list there versus who wasn't. You can make your own deductions after that. But I want to see the camaraderie. And if that means, like, I know it's an overrated aspect to managing in today's day and today's day and age, but if you have to get thrown out of a ball game because the Mets are getting hit repeatedly, yeah, you have to do that, right? There is an underrated aspect of that still within the game of baseball. I understand it's analytically driven. I understand that the manager may not make all the nitty-gritty decisions that they used to make, but you still need to rally the team and you need to build that overall clubhouse presence. So that is what I think I'm going to be watching out for. How do these guys communicate with each other from what we see on the screen versus if we're actually at the stadium on field? Because like Nelson said, he went to a game in 2023. It was at PNC Park against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and the body language, the vibe of the team in between innings was just absolutely horrendous. And that was him watching there in the first like 3-4 rows. So I want to see that get better. Win losses with the current way the roster is shaking out doesn't quite matter to me. Make the good decisions. Lineup decisions, if Mendoza is taking that over, which I don't necessarily think he's going to, with the way the analytics department is kind of being thrust into there, but make the proper decisions and build that camaraderie. That's what I want to see out of Carlos Mendoza, and those are my expectations for him.
Yeah, that's an excellent point you make about camaraderie and how a manager is more of a babysitter and a guy that tries to. It's basically he's a glue guy now. He's basically a parent within an organization now. Like he has to like maintain personalities, and that's the way managing in baseball is now. I think most of us don't like that anymore. I think managers should get more of control of what they're doing in game. And yes, you look at numbers, you look at that, but ultimate decision should be coming down to the manager. But that's just 99% of managers don't do that anymore. They're more of looking in the books and saying this matchup is this matchup. I have to do this because the matchup says so. It's not more of a gut feeling anymore. And you're absolutely right with the camaraderie situation with the Mets, because last year there was no camaraderie. It seems like the clubhouse was split. It seems like this group was with each other, this group was with each other, and then there was another middle group that was with each other, and they never felt like they got on the same page. Like I was watching one of the Mets classics. That's on right now on SNY against Cleveland, and you saw the camaraderie early on in May. The first 2 months, it seemed like it was there, and then like they were like humping each other and stuff like that when they won games or hit a big home run, and then it kind of stopped late in May, and it seemed like it kind of like completely changed the feeling of the clubhouse. And maybe that's not the case, and Buck Showalter kind of put a damper on that, and maybe that was the reason, and they didn't, they stopped having fun. Whatever the reason was, it just seemed like something was missing. What Carlos Mendoza needs to do, outside of between the lines, is the camaraderie, like you said, keep this clubhouse together. Tommy Pham, like you said things where guys weren't working hard. I don't know how that, did he see him take, 99 swings in the batting cage instead of 150? Tommy Pham is an ultimate work guy. He works on everything he does. Not everybody's going to have the same work ethic as everybody else, and that's no excuse. But I don't see a guy like Jeff McNeil or Pete Alonso, Lindor that are, not working as hard as they can to be better. It's just, maybe Tommy Pham's not used to seeing people work not as hard as he does, and thinks that they're slacking. Could that have messed up the clubhouse? Absolutely. But I see it like this. If Carlos Mendoza is going to be the fiery guy that I know he can be, because that's the way he was with the Yankees, he is not going to be afraid of telling his pitcher, hey, put one between the numbers if one of our guys get hit. I think he'll do that because that helps the team come together. We saw that in 2022. The Mets weren't afraid of throwing after a team if they hit one of our guys. And I think Mendoza's going to bring that mentality back. You got to have some balls in this game. Like, I know this is a very soft game now, and everybody worries about people's feelings, but you gotta have some cojones in this game now. You can't be afraid of throwing after somebody to get the other side angry. Who gives a shit? Right? Everybody wants to, taunt everybody and everything like that. And then, say sorry afterwards, like it's a bad thing. No, grow a pair and do your job. And if you got to hit somebody between the numbers to prove a point, you do it. And I think Carlos Mendoza would do that. So I do agree with you, Chris and Hayden, from the other day about that. Yeah, Chris.
Yeah, and absolutely. Like, one thing I want to say on that is I saw in the chat here, Richard was saying, and with all due respect to Richard, I absolutely get where he's coming from, but I do think that point is a little bit overblown in terms of saying screw camaraderie. The team needs talent. Go get him the big premier players.
It's
Like,
a big deal now.
Yeah, we've seen talented teams fail all the time, right? We've seen talented teams fail. The Mets are a prime example of that in 2023. We've seen a team. The Diamondbacks, like, they weren't the most talented team at all, but Tommy Pham said that there was a clear difference, a clear discrepancy between the Mets clubhouse last year and the Diamondbacks clubhouse last year. And was the Diamondbacks more talented overall on paper than the beginning of the Mets or the beginning of the season, the Mets team? No, absolutely not. Not at least not to me. So, like, I get that the expectations were set very high for the Mets and they didn't perform up to those expectations, but you also need to be a very tight unit. I truly believe that. The Braves clubhouse is a prime example. I forgot which Braves player gave an interview about what it's like to be an Atlanta Brave. And I don't want to use them as an example of being something good and that you want to strive toward, but let's face it. They've had great success over the last couple of years. And those guys enjoy playing with each other and have fun while doing it. And you can see that on a nightly basis. A team like the Angels, who had arguably two of the most generational players in this game in Trout and Ohtani, failed. The White Sox, who had a decent team on paper for the last couple of years, have been abysmal. Like, talent needs to be there, obviously. Yes, we understand that, Richard. But let's not throw the fact that this team needs to enjoy being there too and wants to be in that Met uniform with one another and have each other's backs. Because that whole Pete Alonso situation in Atlanta when he got drilled and Buck Showalter didn't do anything, did you see the live looking at the dugout after that happened? It looked dead. It looked dead. Nobody looked like they wanted to do anything or even cared that their teammate just got hit. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to, take these things out of proportion after something like that happens, but there needs to be an answer, like you just said, Rob. There needs to be some sort of retaliation there at some point. Accidental things happen on accident. We understand that. But there's a clear difference of an accident versus what happened there in Atlanta. And with your guys looking dead and as nonchalant as can be, not rallying around their teammate, it's just a very bad look. So that's my whole point on that. And I know it sounds corny, it sounds tacky. I understand that, but it actually is. If you guys have played the sport and played any sport, like, that's how it's supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I know I see. Mothman also put up that talent wins. All right, but was the Dodgers talented than the Diamondbacks? Were the Phillies more talented than the Diamondbacks? Yes, they were. Were the Mets more talented than the Diamondbacks on paper? Yes. But again, it doesn't come down to on paper, because then every year the Yankees and the Dodgers, who seem to be the favorites every single year, would be in the World Series every single year. It does not work like that. I'm not saying you don't need talent. Absolutely. But we saw an 84 and a 90-win team make the playoffs. And the Texas Rangers, who had tremendous amount of talent, won, but it wasn't as the Diamondbacks didn't have any talent, but they didn't have that much talent. There was one or two guys, and Corbin Carroll was basically the only guy that was probably the mega star on that team. Everybody else was a couple of young guys and a lot of the veterans that were on that team as well. And that's the way it goes. And baseball is becoming more of a sport, right? Basketball, it's not like basketball where you can put a super team together and 99% of the time you're going to win. It just doesn't work like that. Baseball is a unique sport now, especially with the extra teams in the playoffs, that it just happens to be this way. And you have to deal with it that way. And again, all you got to do, and let's not, again, we talk about this all the time. When I was talking about it during the season, there was a couple of teams that had one great month that put them in a spot that could have made the playoffs. The Diamondbacks had one really great month. The Reds had really one great month. The Marlins, look at the Marlins. They were consistent, but they had really one great month. And that's where people act like they were so like good. And then you talk about talent. Look at their roster. You're gonna tell me that there ain't 10 teams better than them on paper? Of course there is, but it doesn't work like that, right? A lot of those guys got hot at the right time. Their team was on a roll. All that energy, all that confidence, beating the Dodgers and sweeping them, they brought that right into the Philly series in the NLCS, and you saw it. Their confidence was there. They walked into Game 6 and Game 7 in Philadelphia when nobody gave them a shot. The only people that believed was them. And I go back to 2015 with the Mets. Were the Mets the most talented team in the playoffs? Absolutely not. They won 90 games, won the division, and they weren't better than the Dodgers, and they weren't better than a lot of teams that they faced. They weren't better than the Cubs in 2015. They were supposed to be the darlings of the playoffs, the Cubs. The Cubs were just at that point of being World Series contenders. They were not better. You could say their roster wasn't even better than the Kansas City Royals. Yet they made the World Series. They didn't ultimately win, but they got there, and you can't tell me that they were one of the probably less talented rosters in the playoffs that year, yet they made the World Series. It's just the way it goes. And I understand that people get a little annoyed and about this offseason, but again, it's not like all these guys are off the board and the Mets are, had their hands on the table and not doing anything. There's a lot of guys on the table that can still make this club a pretty good team. And I put up in the poll, and we're going to talk about this in just a second, Chris. Imanaga, Clevenger, Imanaga, Montgomery, Snell, Imanaga, whatever combination of duo pitchers that you want to see the Mets get. Because I still believe the Mets are going to get two pitchers. If that's going to be two on free agency, one in the free agency, one trade, I still think they're going to make a trade. And I think you agree with me. The last time we spoke, you talked about that. But if you had your choice of two pitchers, starting pitchers, that you want the Mets to get, what duo would you want? It doesn't have to be what's in the poll, but any type of duo you would like. What do you think?
You want me to give you my realistic one or the one that I would actually enjoy?
Give both. Why not? Let's piss people off.
I mean, honestly, if I had to draw it up and if I had to say what I wanted personally, even though I know it's not feasible, I saw someone say they don't think it's feasible to go with two lefties. If you're adding two pitchers, I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I think the most attractive kind of duo in terms of who would bolster this team immediately in 2024 would probably be Montgomery and Imanaga, but that's an issue right there. You're adding two lefties on top of what you already have in Quintana. So the only righties you'd have is Severino and Senga and maybe Hauser if they roll with the six-man rotation. So I think the most realistic option, though, is probably Clevenger in a trade. I think that's probably the most realistic option at this point. I don't see them going. You know what I mean? I don't see them going after Montgomery. I don't see them going after Snell. Lucas Giolito was that guy for me, right? Like he was that guy to be like, okay, with the way the Mets are going and trajecting towards, for this offseason and their lack of willingness to go out and give out 4, 5, 6-year deals, like Lucas Giolito was that perfect option to give that short-term deal to, whether it's 1 or 2 years. You obviously saw what the Red Sox gave up for him. I think it was 19.5 million over 2 seasons for a total of 38.5. So that tells me a lot of things about this free agent pitching market. Like Luis Severino, that deal looks like a bargain given what Lucas Giolito got. And I understand that Luis Severino has a lot more injury concern. Lucas Giolito is a lot more of a workhorse, more innings pitched. But these pitchers are going for 13, 14, 15. Like Lance Lynn and what he got with the Cardinals surprised me. So I think it's everything else aside, I'm just strictly talking about on the field production. Anything else that comes with these pitchers is something else. I don't know anything about their personal background, off the field issues, etc. But Clevenger in a trade seems like the most realistic option to me. Now, what I will say is, I'm not sure if you saw, because I know we were on the topic the last go around that we had on this stream. You were talking about Trevor Bauer. Did you see what Zach Scott put on his Twitter account the other day about Trevor Bauer when the Mets were pursuing him in 2021? That was
I
funny to
saw
me.
if it's I said it, but if anybody didn't see it in the chat, you could talk about it, to let people know.
Yeah, so if you guys didn't see that, Zach Scott, obviously, in the Mets front office back in 2021, and when Bauer hit free agency, when he was deciding between the Mets and the Dodgers, almost became a Met. I forgot who broke it early that he was signed with the Mets, and then something funky happened. He signed to the Dodgers. Zach Scott, in charge of negotiating that deal, basically told the front office that he didn't want Trevor Bauer to be a Met, even though they were aggressively pursuing him. He didn't want Trevor Bauer on the Mets, and everybody can make their own assumptions as to why. Probably locker room issues. That's been a big thing with Trevor Bauer. Some stuff like that. Strong personality. We understand that. But I thought it was just funny that tweet came out in lieu of the whole Bauer sort of situation that we've been talking about on here. I don't think it happens. I see a lot in the chat, especially up at the top of the comments, talking about Trevor Bauer. I don't think he's an option for the Mets. It remains to be seen if he's truly going to be blacklisted from the MLB. Like, we don't know if that's going to happen or not. I think some team will sign him to like a 1-year deal, something like that. It's just not going to be the New York Mets. So like Clevenger, probably could be a good option with his on-field production. He's an innings eater as well. Would definitely help the Mets. But I think that you really, with the lack of options, like if you're not going to go out there and give Snell, Montgomery, Imanaga, 5, 6, 7-year deals respectively to what they're going to want, then you have to look at those Tier B options. Giolito was obviously one now off the board. You have Lorenzen or Clevenger, right? You can go grab one of those, preferably Clevenger, because I just don't think Michael Lorenzen is good, quite simply in plain terms. And then you have to utilize the trade market. I mean, if you're really seriously expecting the Mets to fill both of those pitching spot rotations, you have to utilize the trade market. And that's a whole nother crapshoot within itself. I know you're a big fan of Corbin Burns. Maybe the Mets can swing a deal, even though they said that they wouldn't go after a rental. Maybe that changes with the Corbin Burns situation happening in Milwaukee. Nobody really knows. But my realistic option is a trade and Mike Clevenger. That's what I'll say.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that when David Stearns brought up that he's not going to trade prospects for rentals, but he said that when the Mets were basically full go on Yamamoto. Yamamoto didn't sign yet. The Mets were all in on Yamamoto, and maybe they really did feel confident that they could have landed him, and maybe that's why he did it. But plans change, and you have to adapt. And again, Stearns has a relationship with Corbin Burns. He was there a long time. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he drafted Corbin Burns. If I'm not mistaken, I could be wrong, but I believe he did. And there's a relationship there. And why couldn't he trade him and then sign him to an extension? Why not? That would be your ace. And what's really better than Corbin Burns and Kodai Senga 1-2? I don't think many people will complain because 3, 4, 5 only has to be good enough and solid. It doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be solid. And I know I brought up the video with Bauer, and the reason why I did that is because if the Mets are technically transitioning 2024 to go into 2025, why not sign Bauer to a 1-year deal? If he performs well and you're not a good team in 2024, he's going to have tremendous value at the trade deadline if he's pitching well. And if you're looking for 2025 as the year you're going for it, why don't you add assets? That's a possibility as well. It's not just about winning. And if you do, great. But if he's not, and he pitches well, and your team's not doing well, you might get assets for him at the deadline. It's a possibility. Not saying that it's likely, but I mean, if the Mets don't get Imanaga, don't get Montgomery, don't get Snell, there's not that much out there. And if the Mets aren't willing to trade for a pitcher, and there's not much, are they going to give Tyler McGill a chance? I put him in a trade with the Red Sox to get Kenley Jansen. I think that could be a possibility while we talk about bullpen a little later. There's a lot you can look at when it comes to that. But in my situation, I would do Imanaga, Clevenger. If it's just the free agent market, Clevenger, like he says, he'll give you innings. He's not great, but he has an under 4 ERA, and I like pitchers that have under 4 ERAs because they pitch, a lot of them, like Clevenger, pitches every 5th day. He'll give you innings. He's not going to be spectacular, but occasionally he'll give you a start where he goes 7 innings and look really damn good and give up only 1 run. But again, a healthy rotation should put you near the 500 record just for a healthy record.
Yeah.
And I was talking about this on the chat, Chris. 75 wins last year with a team that never had a rotation one time that went through their 5-man rotation healthy, and they still won 75 games, only 6 games under 500. And I think that is something to show when it comes to the lineup itself, where they survived without a rotation with just Kodai Senga pitching every 5th day or 6th day. Yet all it took was Quintana to come back later in the year to solidify a rotation that was already in shambles. And it just shows you just 2 pitchers that pitch every 5th day where you know you're going to get a quality start gives you a chance to win ball games just like that. And I think not enough people are talking about that, Chris.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. I mean, what, 75 wins last year, given how big of a mess this team was? Like, we added like decent depth pieces now, and I know everyone's laughing at it like it's a joke in the chat. I understand that. Like, it's not the sexiest of moves, right? With the depth bullpen pieces and Luis Severino so far. I understand that. But I think if the Mets are able to be more consistent than the 2023 Mets, even if they're not as talented, that can go and serve them a long way in terms of getting back to 500 and sneaking in a wild card spot. What I will say is 2 points here in terms of what the chat brought up. First on Sha Manah, that's my sports at Sha Manah. I would be willing to take a flyer on Sha Manah. He's been pretty bad the last 2 years. I think 4.44 ERA last year, 4.96 the year before. He hasn't really been great ever since he left Oakland, but he was in the pitching lab. I forgot what pitching lab that he, was working with this offseason. Gained 4 to 5 miles per hour on his fastball on the radar. Now, I'm not saying that's going to directly translate to success, but if you're using this year as a transition year in 2024, bridge year, why not bring a guy in like that as well? Lefty, and you can pair him with whatever righty, whether it's free agency or trade. Sha Manah is not a bad option. Honestly, if you want to go the free agent route and totally use this as a bridge year, Manah and Clevenger can win you ball games and sneak you into a wild card spot. Now, this is not going to be the best rotation right behind Kodai Senga, but it's feasible. It's serviceable, right? And like we just said, consistency is a factor that needs to be stressed. And like every 5th day when these guys go out there, we need to see 6 innings. Like we can't be seeing any more of this 4 1/3, 4 2/3 that David Peterson and Tyler McGill love to go out there and do. But all jokes aside, yeah, Sha Manah would not be a bad pickup. At this rate, with the way the offseason is going, Manah would not be a bad pickup. And the whole Corbin Burnes situation, let me tell you what my fear is with that. And I don't have any basis, any base to back these claims up. But with the way that the Dodgers are looking right now in terms of wanting to add premier talent, I really think that they're going to be in on a Corbin Burnes trade market as well, which is going to make the competition for Corbin Burnes that much harder. They have the cap space, and they've already showed that they have the cap space to do it with the whole backloading of Ohtani's contract and deferred payments. I know they went out there and signed Yamamoto. If they can bring on Corbin Burnes, right, and without even the intention of trying to re-sign him, right? The strict 1-year rental for them. Hopefully they win a championship, go all in, win that championship, and then let him go in the open market. I do think that they're going to be a player for Corbin Burnes as well, as crazy as that may sound. They still have the prospect capital to do so, so I would not rule that out. You'd basically trying to be outbidding the Dodgers at that point. Yeah. Plus, there's going to be other suitors for Burnes as well. The Yankees are definitely going to be in on him, right, in terms of the trade market. The Phillies are probably going to take a stab at him too, because they usually are involved in a lot of these big name trade markets and free agents, whether they're successful or not. So, like I said, I don't know how feasible a Burnes trade would be. Rob, I definitely agree with you. If that is an option and the Brewers are seriously willing to engage with you on a trade for Corbin Burnes, I don't care if he's got 1 year left on his deal. You do it. But I'm just very hesitant to sort of say that the Mets are going to pursue that. That's what I'll say. But yeah, like I said, don't rule out the Dodgers in that aspect either.
Yeah, absolutely. But I can say that the Mets, and this is not a huge trade, but Hauser and Taylor, for Coleman Crow, that was a steal. That was a guy that had Tommy John surgery that is not going to pitch this year. and it's basically for nothing. And you got a potential fifth starter and a guy who is a solid major leaguer off the bench and can play all three outfield positions with speed and a little bit of power. There's opportunity for a guy like Stearns who knows that team inside and out, exactly what they need. And again, we saw the Yankees with Soto. The Padres wanted exactly what the Yankees had at that moment. That's why there wasn't any competition for any other team trying to get Soto, because the Yankees had exactly what the Padres needed. And it wasn't, I can assure you, there could have been another team that could have gave a better offer of prospects than the Yankees. But what were the Padres looking for? A ton of pitching. What did the Yankees have? A ton of pitching. Guys that have pitched in the major leagues and one top pitching prospect. Other than that, these guys, King is pretty good, but who knows what he's going to be. And besides Drew Thorpe, other than that, these guys are, fringe major leaguers that can help the bullpen. And if you got a team, if the Mets are the team that have the right prospects that the Brewers are looking for, and say if they want outfield prospects, the Mets have enough of them. What if they want outfield prospects? Well, guess what? Perfect. We match. Well, what if the Brewers want to shed payroll? Maybe they offer you Christian Yelich in that deal as well. That's a big deal. You can add on that contract. You put Yelich in left field, solves your left field problem, and you get Corbin Burnes for a lot less prospects than you probably would have otherwise. And I think that's something that you have to look at as well, that it's not just, prospects for Corbin Burnes. Well, Stearns and Corbin says, hey, listen, we're willing to take the Yelich deal. We'll take that $20+ million contract off the hands every year, and we'll give you 2 prospects instead of the 4 you're looking for. And the Brewers, who always love to look to shed payroll, they do that all the time. And on top of that, they get a couple of prospects back for Burnes. I think that's a win-win on both sides. And I'm not saying to fleece the Brewers, because, when I usually try to do deals, I usually try to be fair on both sides. I don't just look at it from the Mets perspective. You have to look at it too. And I know people in the chat are going to be like, why would you want Yelich? Yelich had a good year last year. I know he has back problems, but this is the same Mets fan base that wants JD Martinez. So you can't have it both ways. You can't say I want JD Martinez, or I want JD Martinez, but don't want Christian Yelich, who can actually play left field and actually, put up a 270 average, give you 20+ home runs and 80 RBIs. And the Mets wish they had that in left field over the last couple of years. So the Mets can go a lot of routes, Chris. And I think, leading right into that left field options, I think the Mets could look for a trade where it involves a starting pitcher and an outfielder they can put in left field, maybe taking on a bad contract or a team that's looking to shed payroll and look taking a player from there as well. Left field options. Where are you looking? Because besides Bellinger, there's nothing else out there. And where are the Mets going to go? Are they going to give Drew Gilbert a chance? Are they going to give Acuna a chance, who mostly played center field and second base, not really left field? Do you want to chance that and give that chance to Drew Gilbert? Or what do you think the Mets should do? Or what is your opinion for the Mets options at left field?
Like I said, I don't know. They're not going to sign anybody on this market, right? Teoscar probably is a no-go for them. Just strictly talking about contracts. When we evaluate the Mets this offseason, we have to think about what type of contracts these guys are going to be asking for in terms of the years, not only the dollars, but the years too. Teoscar's not going to be there. I would like Teoscar, but he's not going to be there. Uncle Ted here in the chat mentioned a very underrated name that I think people don't talk about enough, and that's Lane Thomas. I have watched my fair share of Lane Thomas, right? He's a good defender, speedy guy, has a pretty decent bat. I like Lane Thomas a lot, has 2 arbitration years left on his contract as well. He's controllable, and the Nationals also have 2 pretty high-end guys in their bullpen that they probably would like to offload as well. Now, I don't know what their plans are for the immediate future. I think the Nationals are in a lot better place as an organization in terms of their rebuild than a lot of people want to give them credit for. They're slowly building something back up post Juan Soto, et cetera, that whole team. So Lane Thomas is a good option. Cody Bellinger ain't happening. Teoscar's not happening. Jorge Soler is more of a DH anyway, so I won't even classify him as a left fielder. I really can't see the Mets doing anything but a trade here. And I'm not even fully convinced that they're going to go out and trade. I think that the first options for the Mets in left field are going to be internal options, right? They got Tyrone Taylor from the Milwaukee Brewers. You have Drew Gilbert coming up. Whether he's going to be ready for opening day or not, probably not. But you can fill in that left field spot until he's ready to come up. Maybe it's midway through the season. Maybe it's earlier. Who knows? I just don't know exactly. It's hard to gauge. This is why it's hard to come up here and talk about the Mets this offseason in terms of trying to predict what's going to happen, because we don't know how serious they're taking 2024, right? We don't know. We don't know if they're going to salvage this off season, via trade, or they're just going to let things ride out the way they are. That's what I'm trying to figure out, and it's very hard to predict that. Controllable contracts, though. Controllable. Lane Thomas is definitely one. So shout out Uncle Ted for that. But yeah, Rob, I honestly that's all I would be looking for, right? I mean, unless they pull off a miracle and happen to get like a Luis Robert and Dylan Cease from the White Sox in some miracle trade, I just don't see it happening. And it's not going to be a name that everybody in the chat wants. It's not. That's not happening this offseason. So, like I said, it's already slim pickings, to be honest with you. But given how the Mets are setting themselves up, it's even more basically slim pickings, because what are we really expecting out of the Mets with what we've seen so far this offseason?
Yeah.
Like, my expectations are automatically lowered. I will say that and go on record and say that. Like, my expectations have lowered exponentially. And I think that the Mets have done everything that they can to forewarn us of that. They did everything that they possibly could to forewarn us of this situation as we're sitting here on January 1st in New Year, that this is going to happen in order to build a successful team down the line. So it's really about how serious they are in 2024. Are they going to try to acquire premier talent via the trade market to close this offseason off? Or are they going to ride with what they got and just add more depth pieces and see what happens in 2024? That's really the differentiating factor here with this team.
Yeah, and I think the next move the Mets make, whatever it might be, if it's signing a mid-level starting pitcher or another, outfield piece that nobody's going to get excited about, or trade for a, outfielder that's more defensive purpose than offensive purpose. And that's going to probably be more of a telltale sign, because if the Mets would have got Yamamoto, are you going to say, oh, we're all in at 2024? No. It wouldn't have made much of a difference. It would have gave us, a little better idea of what the rotation is going to look like next year, but it wouldn't have been perfect at all. But, I still see it like this. If they do go internal with left field, I'm not going to complain. I mean, you traded to get prospects. They had really good seasons in the minor leagues. They're shooting through the minor league system. If they win the job in spring training, give them the job. I have no problem with that. And I see people talking about, Steve Cohen showing his money and might and not showing it. And was it just the hype train of the money for a little while? Was anybody complaining last year that the Dodgers only signed JD Martinez and let Turner go from shortstop? Didn't really sign anybody and went with basically the team they had, just adding JD Martinez. Nobody complained. They added no payroll except for the Martinez contract. And yeah, they still won 100 games, but a lot of people believe that, wow, they were gearing up for 2020 this offseason to spend money. If the Mets are doing the same thing, why complain? Because they won 75 games last year and now you're a little antsy? Yeah, okay, that's understandable. But there's a double standard where the Mets pull back the wallet a little bit and all of a sudden it's Wilpons 2.0. Yet one of the other richer franchises in baseball did the same thing last year by just getting a guy who had back issues and had no idea he was going to have a season like that. And I can assure you the Dodgers did not think Martinez was going to have a season like that, because he constantly had back injuries the year prior. And there was a lot of concern signing Martinez, even for the Mets. So they didn't spend any money last offseason, and they got rewarded by this type of offseason by getting Ohtani and Yamamoto and Tyler Glasnow and probably more. So if the Mets find a way to have, a 500 season, maybe a couple of games over 500, by the team, whatever they put out there on opening day. I can consider that a win, considering the fact if you're a couple games over 500, you're probably going to be close to a playoff spot. And 2025 is gearing up to be a very interesting 2025. And we're going to be constantly talking about Soto and Bueller and all these guys, Bregman, all these guys we're going to be talking about. So it's okay. People wanted to kill the Mets for the highest payroll in baseball. Yet when they pull the reins back a little bit and try to take a more analytical, smarter approach with not spending a ton of money, they get killed for that as well. They can't win. They're between a rock and a hard place. And I find that hilarious because if the Mets would have won 100 games last year, everybody said, had a deep run in the playoffs, everybody thought the money would have been smart money. The Dodgers can be a complete disaster. What if they never get to a World Series with the money they're spending over the next 3 years? Are they going to kill the Dodgers? No, they'll blame Dave Roberts and saying, getting a new manager in and we'll just fix everything. So, Chris, I say it's funny that no matter which way the Mets go, they're on the chopping block. And it's kind of unfortunate. And I think it sucks as a fan of the Mets,
Well, let's be honest. The cap space situation basically handcuffed them. The last couple of off-season spending has handcuffed them this year, right? I mean, they had to do, I think it's pretty much accepted now that the Mets had to do what they did at the trade deadline. Like they absolutely had to mitigate that sunken ship and get back some sort of valuable returns. So with the cap space and the luxury tax still being at what? Like they're getting knocked $100 million, somewhere around there, the highest luxury tax, especially this year, right? Even with the contracts that were offloaded, like they are handcuffed this offseason. I don't think a lot of people realize that. And that's a byproduct of them trying to spend all that money in the previous off seasons. And guess what? That Scherzer deal, that Justin Verlander deal, those were short-term deals, and they were not going to bring stability to the New York Mets for the long term. Those are short-term options. Try to win now and figure it out later. Like that's what what we're seeing with Stearns right now is having a plan and building a core foundation from the ground up. And we've never seen, like, when's the last time we've seen that from the Mets? Because it hasn't been since Steve Cohen came and took over as owner. Steve Cohen has never hit this reset button. It was spend from the start. The only foundational piece I can confidently say is probably Francisco Lindor in that blockbuster trade to try to add on to that core. Now you have Nemo, Lindor, Alonso's future's in the balance with the Mets too. I firmly do believe that they'll re-sign him to keep the core going because they have years of control left on all these guys. But you need some structure and some foundation because when you offload contracts like the Mets have done, you can't just replace them with money. You can't just keep throwing money at this team. Like that's not feasible at all. So I get that we all want to sign these guys, right? They want to sign XYZ free agent. With the Mets, we have the richest owner in all of baseball, but it's not feasible to keep throwing money to build a foundation. And like the chat was saying, like, and I sort of agree with it, the Dodgers already had that foundation that allowed them to spend in free agency.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
How did they get that foundation though? And Easy brought up a comment that I really want to talk about. He said, why do you keep on comparing the Mets to the Dodgers? Number one, when the new ownership group of the Dodgers took over, do you know what they did the first 3 seasons? They did exactly what Steve Cohen did. The blueprint the Dodgers had when the new ownership group took over, that's exactly what Steve Cohen did. He bought older free agents and traded for veteran guys. They didn't win World Series, but they were competitive. And what did that do? That gave them opportunities to draft well, gain that farm system, build up that farm system while putting a competitive team out there and try to win it with veteran guys and making trades. Do we all remember the Adrian Gonzalez trade, the Upton trade, all those trades when they made that huge trade to get all those veterans in? These were veterans on their last leg trying to win while developing a farm system. They did the exact same thing. Yet go back to 2010. and how the Dodgers' new ownership group looked. That's exactly what they did. In the first 3 years, they went all in. They tried to spend a ton of money. They tried to get veterans in here while building a farm system, not trading prospects away. It took them 5-6 years into the 2015-16 to really see that farm system, that development of their farm system really showcase itself during those years. It took about 3, 4, 5 years to really show what that farm system is. The Mets did that in 3 years based on these trades and the last couple of drafts Billy Epler had. And it's a very similar blueprint. It's not just about last year, about the offseason spending, Easy. It's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about was the blueprint always, when it came to the Dodgers, was to try to be competitive and build a farm system. The Mets were trying to win by signing veteran guys, spending a ton of money while holding on to a farm system that was really struggling when Cohen took over. Yet in 3 years, going on 4th year of ownership, they're top 5 in farm system in 3 years. Do you know how hard that is to do? That is not usually the case. Usually it takes 5-6 years to develop a farm system over 3 or 4 drafts. They did it in 3 years. That is unique in baseball. And even the Dodgers didn't send players and pay their full salaries to get back prospects like Cohen did. So he expedited what the Dodger blueprint was, and which is a 4 to 5 year plan to build a farm system so you can have sustainable farm system. So when you do have injuries, you can bring a guy up from the farm system and you don't have to miss a beat. And then when your farm system is ready to go, guess what? Now you can sign these guys. And that's why they're talking about 2025, because the Gilberts, the Acuñas, the Scotts, the Tidwells, the Vasos, all those guys, Hamels, all those prospects, there's a lot of them that could make that 2025 team and could be a big part of that. Now, if you accompany big time signings, maybe a couple of trades and those prospects, well, guess what? You followed the Dodger blueprint to a T. The only difference is the Mets spent the money and they weren't as successful as the Dodgers. That happens. But you can also say that the Dodgers never had a team like the Atlanta Braves in their division competing against them. So they could win 92 games, 93 games and win the division and make the playoffs. They didn't have a lot of competition. Go back to the 2010s, to the 2013s. Who was really competing? The Padres were in shambles, right? Even the Padres tried to go veteran worthy, spend a little bit of money, and then they broke it up in a couple of years, right? The Diamondbacks weren't very good. The Giants were in their mix of their, championship runs, but they were having a good year, bad year, good year, bad year. So, and that's the point. Yeah, easy. I understand that, but you go back to 2006, and oh, by the way, the Mets actually continue to beat the Dodgers every time they face them in the playoffs, by the way. The last time the Dodgers beat the Mets was 1988, which was the Dodgers' last real world championship, by the way. So you got to remember that too, Chris, and everybody in the chat. It's not just about the offseason that the Dodgers had last season, which was mediocre, and a lot of people thought they were in trouble. But a lot of people thought the Padres would be better. The Diamondbacks were good, but there was no competition. You got to remember, there was a lot of bad teams in the NL West. The Dodgers benefited from that as well. They didn't have a team like the Braves or the Phillies. Remember, look how many games the Padres won, 82. That was the second best team, the third best team in that division, with a Diamondbacks team nobody gave any chance to. So we got to remember that too. The Dodgers had a lot of bad teams in their division and a lot of underperforming teams as well. So the Mets are following a blueprint like the Dodgers. And we're killing them for that. And I think that's what people are missing.
Go look at that 80-win Dodger team in 2010 and their lineup. I think that's what we're going to see out of the Mets in 2020, 2024. And then you get 3 years of back-to-back consecutive 80-win seasons for the Dodgers. I think it was 80, 82, then 86 in 2013. And then for the last decade, they've been 90-plus wins every year. I completely agree with you. I know where you're going. Absolutely.
Yeah, and like I said, when the Dodgers were winning 81, 82, 83 games, there was only one wild card. So they weren't making the playoffs, or if they barely snuck in. Now you're a 500 team. You're in that third wild card mix easily. Because I went over it the other day with Hayden, or excuse me, yesterday on a hot stove that I did by myself, and I talked about it. Look at all the teams other than the Braves, the Dodgers, and let's put the Brewers right now at the top of the Central, right? All these other teams are in the mediocre to above average teams where a couple of wins here or there. And I talked about this. If the Mets had a 500 June, they would have been in the same around win total of the Padres, the Diamondbacks, the Cubs, and you know what? Maybe even closer to the Phillies than any of those teams that made the wild card, like the Marlins. Do you expect the Marlins to be better than the Mets again? I mean, it probably can be very close, but again, a 500 team or a couple of games over, you're in the wild card spot, and that's important. And we're not really talking about that as much. And again, you just talked about it with the Dodgers. When the new ownership group took over, it took them 4 or 5 years to really get everything settled farm system wise, where they can go out, spend money, make trades, make their team better, and then use their farm system to pick and choose where they needed those guys in the rotation, in the lineup, and it worked when they put it all together. That takes time. The only reason why we're going a little crazy as Met fans was because the new owner for the Mets tried to win by spending money and only spending money. It's hard to do that, but he tried. Would you have rather him come in and says, "Listen, fans, we're not going to try to win for 3-4 years. We got to build up the farm system." That means Nimmo would have been on this team. McNeil would have probably not been on his team. Maybe even Alonso got traded, and Lindor trade would have never happened. And then what this team would have been losing 70 plus games, 65 games, maybe losing 100 games. Would you want that? Maybe it was the better route to go because maybe this year in year 4, it could have been the Otani or Yamamoto season or to trade for a Juan Soto. Maybe that was the case. But if Mets fans would have heard that from a new owner who was going to be the richest owner in baseball saying, we're not going to spend any money, and that was the same around time where McNeil was going to be a free agent coming up. Nimmo, DeGrom was coming a free agent. We never would have got the Scherzer, maybe not trade for Chris Bassett, and we would have sort of Tyler McGill's, the David Petersons of the world, being at the top of this rotation. So you got to remember that. And he could have done that. And I think Met fans would have killed him and saying, oh, he's just in it to just, show his shiny Mets ownership on the wall. They would have killed him. Yet you hear Joe Benigno on WFAN saying, oh, he's the Wilpon 2.0, David Stern, small market. What is he supposed to do? David Stern's supposed to come in here, trade all the prospects and sign everybody. And then when it doesn't work out, blame him for spending money. I never blame an owner for spending. You spend money, you're trying, right? There is not a lot of owners in baseball that are actually baseball people. A lot of these guys are real estate, hedge fund, oil guys that got their money elsewhere and bought a team. And what did they do? They get the right people in to run the baseball operations. We're talking about Cohen like, he has his hand in every cookie jar like other owners. He might, but a lot of these owners bring in the right baseball people, and that's why they're successful. You think Magic Johnson knows his ass from his elbow about baseball operations? No, but he's a partial owner in the ownership group of the Dodgers, right? The new Dodgers owners aren't baseball people, but they got baseball people in there that know what they're doing. And that's what Steve Cohen did not have in his first 3 seasons of owning the team. He wanted David Stearns. You know what he was getting? People that he didn't want. But he had to have a GM because he was going to run things down in the winter meetings or sign players or trade players. He had Sandy Alderson for 2 seasons who Major League Baseball says the owners were like, listen, you don't get Sandy Alderson on the year. We're not approving you as an owner. We have to remember that too. He never had the person he wanted to run baseball operations. Now he does. Give them a chance.
And what I was going to say is that why I'm very confident in the Mets moving forward because, especially in 2025 with the free agent class, like you have the big names there and the trade market too. Like I feel like a lot of people are undervaluing the trade market in 2025 as well. If Brett Beatty doesn't work out at third base, we'll see a couple of big names probably be floating out there. I know someone was saying Jose Ramirez in the chat. I don't know necessarily if the Guardians are going to want to trade Jose Ramirez. I mean, he just had a 7-year contract. Maybe if they, I don't know. That situation is very murky within itself, but there are other third base options to go after in 2025 in case Brett Baty doesn't, impress us. But what I will say is that you have the core already, right? We just named them. Brennan Nimmo, and let's look at their ages. Brennan Nimmo is 30 years old. Edwin Diaz is 30 years old. Francisco Lindor, 30 years old. Pete Alonso, almost 30 years old. What's the common theme here? These guys have what? 3 maybe years of their prime left before they hit 34, 35 years old. Like they can't afford, like, this is why I'm upset that this season is going to be a retool sort of season, right? Unless anything drastic happens with the Mets moving forward, which I don't foresee happening this offseason. But it also makes me ponder, like, really, what is the direction that this organization is going in, right? I mean, do we believe in this core to win? I know we had this conversation months ago, Rob, on here. Like, do we believe in this core to win, given the right pieces surrounding this team? Because if you're already giving up an offseason here with these guys already being the age that they are, and one of them has a contract that's due very shortly, they're going to tell you a lot by default, given, one, if they give him that extension, and 2, how aggressive they're going to be next offseason. Now, like I said, you already invested the money, long-term money, big money, to a closer, over $100 million for a closer. You overpaid your center fielder, right? But because you had to do it. I firmly believe they had to do it, so they overpaid Nimmo to keep him to let him stay. Lindor got his deal. So if you are not going to maximize the return on those already made investments, what are we doing here? So I firmly believe that's why the Mets will be in good shape to spend that money once once money comes off the books in 2025, because I don't think that they're naive enough to let these years slip away on these big contracts that they already given out. Or they could just let Pete Alonso walk, reallocate that money somewhere else.
Yeah.
There's a lot of options at play here. And no matter what happens, some part of the fan base isn't going to be happy. Like, I think we already have to we have to already account for that. So I just want to challenge the people listening to this in the chat to look at it in both perspectives, right? Like, what do the Mets, like, what do they have to do? Like, what kind of position did they set themselves up for with those contracts being given out to an Edwin Diaz, to a Francisco Lindor, etc.? Contracts that they needed to make happen at that time, but it's set themselves. It's put a timer on them, right? It's put a timer on this organization. Right. So, food for thought.
That's the problem that I have with people saying that, they were so excited about Nimmo signing and McNeil and giving Lindor the contract. That the organization told you that this is the core they believe in, and if you do or don't, they're in it for the long run with these guys. That's it. And if this team don't win it over the next 3-4 years, well, now you got Nimmo at 34, 35 years old, now a corner outfielder, Lindor, the Asian shortstop, and Alonso, who was going to be 33, 34 at that time. And then what are you going to do? And that's why I'm saying that, all right, you made your bed with this core, right? If you signed Nimmo, you signed McNeil, you gave a deal to Diaz, and you gave a contract for Lindor. Well, I mean, all signs most likely said, all right, we believe in this core, and I'm pretty sure believe that the Mets are going to re-sign Nimmo. I'm sorry, Alonso, and that's telling you that they completed the core that they believe in. Now, you got to put all the pieces around it, absolutely. But if you don't win, don't blame the other pieces around them. You got to blame the guys who got the contracts. Because you know what? You think there was a ton of pressure on Pete Alonso this year? Wait until he gets that $200+ million contract for the Mets. And then let's see the pressure and what he needs to do under all that pressure with that big contract on his shoulders, because Lindor got that contract and has been exactly what you expected from Francisco Lindor, because he's been, if not career-wise, the same, if not better. So, and Nimmo, he signed a contract. He had a really good year. Like, it's hard to kill Nimmo, but again, you don't win. You're not blaming the pieces around the core. You're blaming the core, right? There's a reason why Yankee fans love the core four. You know why? Because they won. You think anybody's, talking about, the David Justices of the world, or, the Paul Neal's, Tina Martinez's? Yeah, they were Yankees that contributed, but everybody was talking about the Derek Jeters, the Bernie Williams, the Andy Pettitts, the Jorge Posadas. That's what they were talking about. Yeah, they bring up Paul Neal, Tina Martinez, and all of them, but those are trades. If the Yankees won, and who was revered on those teams? Their core. And that's the point. The Mets don't win. I'm not blaming Scherzer. I'm not going to blame, I'm not blaming Marte. I'm not even blaming Francisco Lindor, Francisco Alvarez at this point, or anybody else they might bring in. That could be, like, if the Mets bring in Montgomery, am I going to blame Montgomery? If the Mets don't win in 3 to 4 years, if they bring him in, or Imanaga, or whoever else? No, I'm going to blame this core. And I'm going to continue to say it. This core has proven nothing. Because Alonso, again, it's not an individual sport. I understand that. But when you're going on a contract year, and you've already been in this, you're going on your 6th season, and the majority of them have been losing seasons, at some point you got to stop blaming the people that are the main focus of this team, and that is the core. And we forget that. And I think, we're so afraid to blame our homegrown talent, but at some point you have to. I can care less if you're a homegrown player or not. All right. Is it nice? Is it a nice story? Is it beautiful? Yes. David Wright is a beautiful story, but also he didn't win. So we can talk about David Wright being a homegrown guy and wanting to be a Met his entire career, and technically he was, but he didn't win either. And he made a World Series in 2015 when he was basically a shell of himself and had really no bearing on what the Mets did. And we go back to that all the time. And the core is the issue. And somebody brought up about David Justice. Yeah, he had a big 3-run home run. Absolutely. But again, people don't talk about that. People talk about Derek Jeter hitting that big home run at Shea Stadium to help put the Yankees in a lead in the 2000. They talk about the amazing play Derek Jeter made down the line to throw home or to flip the ball home against Oakland. You hear all that. The Bernie Williams big home run, the great catches, Jorge Posada making great plays, Andy Pettitte pitching one-hitters in playoffs, who was a good season pitcher but was a great postseason pitcher. That's what you talk about. The core players, right? What numbers are they really retiring? What guys are Hall of Famers? Right? We forget about that. The core matters with this Mets team. And Chris, before we finish it up here, do you have any bullpen targets you want to see the Mets go after, since it seems like they're giving 1-2-year deals at most, 2 bullpen arms, and that's why Jordan Hicks is probably going to be off the list? Uh-oh, my cat's going crazy.
Yeah, I don't think Jordan Hicks is going to be on the table for the Mets. I still think with the age of Hector Neris, he's going to be an option. But with the amount of money that he's going to want, I don't see the Mets probably ponying that up. We just saw that they were interested in Giolito, and I wouldn't say they got outbid, because I don't know the full parameters of how that deal shook out, but they were very interested in Giolito to the very end, and you saw how much he made with the Red Sox there of $19.5 million per season. So it just seemed like the Mets were out after how much AAV he got. But the chat here sounding off on Pete is awesome to me, because you have, like I said, nobody's going to be happy either way. The Mets go and sign Pete Alonso to whatever money he wants, right? I mean, if he wants north of $30 million, that's what he wants. The Mets can't change his mind there, and you know who his agent is. But is he really worth that much money? Only us as Mets fans can value how much Pete Alonso should make in comparison to guys like Olsen, Freeman, etc. Now, I don't think in today's day and age of contracts just inflating, I don't think it's comparable or realistic to compare his money. But it's just funny because a lot of people saying trade Alonso, he's going to get overpaid, and then the other half saying you can't let Pete go. What are we doing here? So it's just food for thought, both sides. But bullpen, Robert Stevenson's a name that intrigues me. I like Robert Stevenson a lot. Like I said earlier before with the Lane Thomas, I'm not sure. In-division trades are really hard to pull off, but you can kill two birds with one stone there with Lane Thomas and one of those bullpen arms. I think Finnegan, I forgot the other guy's name. There's a flamethrower out of that bullpen, but Finnegan is also a name that I'm looking out for. Man, I mean, like I said, it's really hard to judge because we've been signing all of these depth pieces so far for this bullpen. We do need a lockdown eighth inning guy, but if I'm not willing to go that extra year, that third or fourth year, you take a guy like Jordan Hicks off. Josh Hader was never really going to be a realistic, acquisition anyways for the Mets, given Edwin Diaz's situation. Hector Neris, most likely with his age, could probably take a 1 or 2 year deal. David Robertson is a guy who's probably going to take a 1 year deal. Definitely can look at him, but the Mets are clearly missing that eighth inning lockdown guy. So it's very curious to me. We've talked bullpen targets this whole entire offseason so far. The bullpen market is very slow right now. I'm not even sure exactly what it's going to take for this market to heat up. It doesn't seem like teams are prioritizing that right now, although the Braves did. They made a couple of early trades for that bullpen, so props to them. They did a great job there shoring that up. But like I said, yeah, just to go back on this whole sort of segment that we did today, just talking about this team from an objective lens, I definitely agree with you. The core definitely needs to take on some responsibility. And I saw people talking about whether you want to re-sign a guy like Pete Alonso this offseason versus the next offseason when he's, everyone's open to signing Pete Alonso. The Cubs, the Giants might be in on him wanting that big bat. So what I will say about that, though, is Pete Alonso is not going to sign a hometown discount. If you guys are expecting that, I promise you, as much as he says he loves playing in New York, I bet you he loves the money more. So we have to have serious and objective discussions surrounding Pete Alonso. Would I give him $30 million to make him the highest for a paid first baseman in the league? Yes, I would. If he wants anything north of that, I'm sorry. There need to be real conversations had about his potential future with the Mets. I'm sorry. It just is what it is. I want Pete Alonso on this team. Don't get the wrong idea. Do not get the wrong idea. I want Pete Alonso on this team. But with everything that I've seen in the reports so far shake out, they're not even close. The last time we heard, they're not even close on a figure yet. They've had those preliminary talks. They're not close on a figure. So, like I said, that's what I got with Pete Alonso. Bullpen is what it is. It's not something like, you're not going to go out there and sign every top free agent bullpen arm. That's just not feasible. The Mets need an eighth inning guy, but the whole theme here is how serious are they for 2024?
Yeah.
We don't know. Nobody knows. So the premier talent that they're going to be trying to acquire, nobody knows. And yes, home run hitters that say everyone loves the money. Yeah, Pete Alonso is going to get his bag. Trust me, he will. But he's going to get north of $200 million. He's probably going to get $30 million if I had to call it. I don't want to make any assumptions about Pete Alonso and his time in New York and if he's really, truly enjoyed playing here or not. And I don't think he should sign a hometown discount. He should prioritize his bag first and foremost. But what's best for the Mets long-term in terms of cap flexibility versus what Pete Alonso provides you, those 40, maybe even 50 home runs versus, that average that everyone likes to talk about, 220, 225, whatever have you.
Yeah.
It's all about allocations. It's all about money allocations, man. And like I said, it's something where we talked about hometown discounts. We talked about that, Rob.
Well, you know what?
He's not going to sign one.
Listen, extensions happen when a team gets a little bit of a discount and the player gives a little bit back because he wants to be with a team. Clearly, that's not happening with Pete Alonso, right? And the only way the Mets give him $300 million or north of that or whatever crazy number it might be is if Pete Alonso picks up the phone and says, hey, the Cubs, they're offering me $310 for 10 years. Either match it or I'm going to the Cubs. That's the only time the Mets should match an offer or give an offer to Pete Alonso like that, because there is no reason why you're going to overpay on an extension. It's stupid for the Mets. What are you going to do? Get some good credit with Met fans? Is that all you care about? that Pete Alonso's a homegrown talent. Great. He could be a homegrown talent for the next 9 years. You don't win. Are you happy? Right? Everybody loves David Wright. The Mets never won with David Wright. I love David Wright, but we glorify him like he brought us a championship. Right? You know why we glorify guys like Keith Hernandez and Doc Gooden and Darlin and all those Gary Carter, all those guys? Because they brought you a championship. And a lot of them were acquired. A lot of them weren't even homegrown. Right? So if Pete Alonso gets this $300 million contract he wants, it's going to be from another team, or the Mets match a big offer from a team like the Giants, the Cubs, or whoever else. So the framework of 2024 is, let's see still, because the offseason is not over. If they sign Montgomery and Clevenger, excuse me, a little tongue. Sorry, I'm going crazy with the Michigan game on right now. They're trying to
I got to tune into that. I'm not sure what's going on.
They're trying to hold on to an overtime lead here. They just scored a touchdown in overtime, trying to keep Alabama out of the end zone, and they win and get to the national championship game. So I apologize if I keep on looking up and get distracted. But yeah, if the Mets sign Imanaga and Clevenger, well, technically they're not really punting 2024. Those are solid sign-ins, and you could say that the Mets have a solid rotation going into 2024. And if the offense does what they're supposed to do, at least the core guys, like if Alonso hits back to his career average of 250 with his 45 home runs and 100 RBIs, if McNeil bats 300, Nimmo did what he did last year, and Lindor does what he did last year, well, guess what? That's already a better lineup. And that's not including if Marte comes back somewhat healthy. And now you look at Francisco Alvarez, also in this lineup, who is his second year on this team, who is probably a 25, 30 home run guy, just like that. That's added as well. So there's a lot to look at, Chris. And I do agree with you with Stevenson's in the bullpen. I like Stevenson's in the bullpen as well. Again, I think Jordan Hicks is probably a pipe dream along with Josh Hader. So, Chris, let everybody know what you're going to be doing with your channel and your final thoughts, buddy.
Listen, my final thoughts are this. I want Pete Alonso, but I want him at the right price. You don't have to overpay Pete Alonso. If he doesn't truly want to be a New York Met, then he doesn't want to be a Met. You offer him more than the market value. You make him the highest paid first baseman, but you don't go much more than that. And giving him $30 million a year will do just that. I've always projected him at 8 years, $240 million. $30 million on the dot. Give him that, see if he signs it. If not, I don't know what to tell you, because when you go into 32, 33, 34, what are we really doing here? You know what I mean? Like, we're all talking about the Mets overpaying XYZ player. When is that trend going to stop? When is that trend going to stop? So, like I said, I like Pete Alonso. I'm willing to overlook average, even if that starts to dip, as long as the home run production is there, and I want him on my team. He's one of my favorite Mets. But at the end of the day, the Mets have to make business decisions. So I don't want anybody in the chat getting the wrong idea, maybe thinking I'm some anti-Pete Alonso guy. But for what's best for this team, given the trajectory that they're going down, there have to be serious considerations if the contract negotiations get to a point where they're just not feasible. That's all I'll say on that. We'll talk about this a lot more on all of our streams as we get more steam and more information on what Pete Alonso and the talks are, what the Mets are on that front. But True Mets Talk Podcast, going to be releasing more episodes on the channel this week. Interstate Mets Report live on Friday with Nelson on the channel. Like I said, over 350 subscribers. I definitely appreciate everyone's support on the channel. Thank you, Rob, for hosting this all the time, all these graphics. I know they take a lot of work. I appreciate you setting this up and doing this and having me on. Subscribe to the channel at CPNY Sports. Should be in the description. Hit that thumbs up. Thank you for the support. That's all I got.
Absolutely. And again, I always appreciate you coming on. The roundtable will be back and better than ever soon. The holidays put, a lot of different schedules up there, and a lot of people had work to do with their channel and with the holidays, with family and stuff like that. So it was hard to get all of us together at the same time. But I do appreciate Nelson, Chris, Hayden for spending a little time on the channel and stuff like that, and having a lot of Mets talk. So until next time, guys, we'll see what happens. Hopefully we get some good news in 2024. Chris, once again, Happy New Year, and thanks again for tuning in. As always, Mets go Mets, and go blue, and they stop Alabama, and they're going to the national championship.
Nice.
Yes.
Congrats.
Let's go. Sorry, my camera went crazy. I'm sorry about that. But let's go, Mets. I'll see you next time, guys. Chris, thank you again. See you next time, guys. Have a good night.
Let's go, Mets.
Oh, they're hollering, they're cheering, and they're jumping in their seats. Where do they go? To meet the Mets! All the fans are true to the orange and blue. So hurry up and come on down. 'Cause we got ourselves a ball club, the Mets of New York.